A train travelling from Świnoujście to Rzeszów had to be stopped in Puławy after damage to the traction system and broken windows in the carriage. The authorities are working on the site, including the police, the prosecutor's office, the Central Bureau of Investigation, and officers from the Lublin branch of the Internal Security Agency. 475 passengers were travelling on the trains from Świnoujście to Rzeszów, but their journey ended in Puławy. Between Puławy Azoty and Puławy Chemia stations, the train driver reported a break in the traction network and damage to the pantograph, resulting in 3 windows being broken in the carriage.
Około 20.
At around 9:30 p.m. yesterday, 2 further incidents were also confirmed. One was damage to the power lines on the same railway line over a length of about 60 metres, and a few hundred metres further on, a metal clamp had been installed on the railway tracks. This clamp had been cut by passing trains. On Sunday morning, a tragedy was miraculously avoided on the same route in the Galvolin district. Unfortunately, there is no doubt that we are dealing with an act of sabotage. Fortunately, there was no tragedy, but the matter is very serious. Today we are dealing with an attempt at internal destabilization and destruction of railway infrastructure, which could also have led to a railroad disaster. The tragedy did not occur because the train driver noticed the irregularities in the railway infrastructure in time and reacted. Allegedly, he had been warned by other drivers, but witnesses say that they heard the sound of an explosion on Saturday evening. There was an explosion. It was Saturday, right? Saturday at 9 p.m. I heard a bang. It was so loud that the windows shook. Reports of Saturday's explosion are confirmed by Iwona Korowska, the administrator of the Galvolin Powiat. I received information about an explosion, a planted charge. She adds that a preliminary inspection of the tracks has already revealed damage to a section of track, which caused a train to stop. It is a 1-meter gap, most likely caused by the explosion. This is an act of sabotage. Nothing like this has ever happened in the area before, and I don't think it's happened anywhere else in Poland in recent years. This is simply the first time something like this has happened. As such, until now, there has been no need to monitor these lines in any special way. On the night from Saturday to Sunday, that is after the explosion and before the train was stopped, at least one other train travelled along the route. The train driver reported an unevenness on the track. He was a PKP intercity train driver. It was the Wisłok train, and he reported it. And then the traffic controller informed the next Koleje Mazowieckie train, and that train driver stopped at the spot. However, RMF-FM reported as many as 3 trains may have travelled over the damaged tracks. When asked about this, the Minister of Infrastructure evaded the question. Minister, RMF-FM reports that 3 trains passed over the damaged section of track. Can you confirm this? Minister, did 3 trains pass over the damaged section? Can you confirm this information? Minister Klimczak, why are you running away? Why won't you confirm this information? The most important thing is that there were no train derailments in the railway traffic itself. In the railway system itself, we have no injuries. These situations were quickly identified. PKP has not yet commented on the situation. However, Minister of Internal Affairs Marcin Kierwiński confirmed reports that the detonation was carried out using a metal wire. Yes, we can confirm that the charge was detonated using a wire. Everything points to this. The prosecutor's office is still working on the case. The prosecutor's office will provide details. However, experts warn that last weekend Poland entered a completely new stage of hybrid warfare with Russia. The adversary has begun preparations for war. It is building a certain environment here that is intended to undermine public confidence in the government and in fundamental institutions, such as the armed forces and the police, and to create conditions conducive to potential aggression on Polish territory. This means that we have entered a completely new phase, no longer just informational diversion, but physical acts of sabotage against Polish infrastructure. How prepared is Poland? Not very. Railway workers say they have been trying to force the government to make changes for many months. They cannot even get encrypted radios. Anyone may still buy a cheap walkie-talkie and listen in on railway conversations. You have heard about trains being stopped by radio signals and so on. They hear these conversations, and we railway workers are informing potential terrorists of what we are transporting on each particular train, in which particular carriage. In a situation where the services and authorities fail, each citizen must take responsibility for the state and the safety of ourselves and our loved ones. We must all be careful, observe what is happening, and immediately react and contact the appropriate services. What can we do? Increase vigilance, increase observation, especially around railway stations, hospitals, and schools, what we internally consider to be important objects. And one more thing. Do not, under any circumstance, accept mysterious orders found on the internet for which someone wants to pay with cryptocurrency. It is almost certainly an order from hostile services. The police should also be informed of any such situation. The explosion on the railway line from Warsaw to Lublin, which only by a miracle did not lead to tragedy, is another example of the sabotage operations which have been occurring in Poland with increasing frequency. The services under Prime Minister Donald Tusk are unable to cope with saboteurs, and Russian hybrid activities are gaining momentum and becoming increasingly aggressive. Yes, these are Russian provocations. These are actions bordering on war, and in fact war. This is a hybrid war. In fact, an act of Russian aggression intended to cause chaos, confusion, and intimidation among the inhabitants of Poland. A fire in a warehouse at 44 Mariwilska Street in Warsaw, burning warehouses on Modlinska Street, also in the capital. A fire in a block of flats in the Ziomki housing estate near Warsaw. A supermarket set on fire in Grodzisk Mazowiecki. These are not random events. They are acts of sabotage and actions aimed at destabilization. As a result of fundamental changes in its intelligence activities, Russia has changed the formula for the activities of its services in Poland. The Russians have switched to a different method of operation, building a proxy network of one-off operations. A fire at the Ratsławicka metro station or at a high school in Grodzisk Mazowiecki during final exams. Everywhere, Polish citizens were exposed to mortal danger. Hostile services are operating on many fronts.
Od kilku lat mamy do czynienia z systematycznymi.
For several years now, we have been dealing with systemic hostile actions by Russia against Poland. The most visible is a hybrid attack on our eastern border. And it is worth remembering that the politicians who today comprise Donald Tusk's government coalition focus their attacks not on Belarus, the aggressor, but on the Polish government, Polish soldiers and Polish officers for defending the country and not letting the waves of migrants in. But Russia's actions, calculated to be below the threshold of war, don't just happen at the border. They are also operations of influence, political destabilization, arson attacks in Ziomki, Grodzisk, and on Modlinska Street in Warsaw, and the use of Ukrainians for this purpose. This is really happening, and unfortunately, those in power are burying their heads in the sand. Russian services mainly use foreigners, often Ukrainians, for acts of sabotage, but also for observing and photographing Polish critical infrastructure. And they have their own insidious goal in doing so. Not only are they trying to evade responsibility, but they also want to stir up negative public sentiment.
Te zagrywki, czy też granie kartą antyukraińską.
Playing the anti-Ukrainian card is obviously in Russia's favor because in some way the Russians can count on Polish public opinion, Polish society, to turn away from supporting Ukraine's efforts to maintain an independent, sovereign state. And these anti-Ukrainian sentiments will flare up even more in Poland. The Kremlin services recruit their collaborators in a very ruthless manner, and the most valuable ones for them are Ukrainians residing in Poland. Using Ronet, that is, Russian social media, the special services of the Russian Federation recruit various types of saboteurs, propagandists and agents, their fifth column, and with the help of cryptocurrencies, they pay them money to carry out sabotage and diversion. It was the Kremlin that sent the spy Pavel Rubtsov to Poland, who operated under the cover of Spanish journalist Pablo González and sought contacts among left-wing journalists, among others. Although he was arrested in February 2022 and spent almost 2.5 years in pre-trial detention, he was finally handed over to Moscow in August last year by Donald Tusk's government.
My na naszym podwórku mamy kolej.
In our backyard, another threshold of escalation has been crossed. In 2021, the border was attacked. In 2022, a full-on war broke out, followed shortly thereafter by acts of sabotage and activities by Russian military intelligence. In the meantime, GRO Colonel Pavel Rubtsov was detained by Polish services, and shortly thereafter, our borders were violated, drones attacked, and acts of sabotage became brazen. In 2023, when the United Right government was in power, the authorities broke up a network of Russian spies.
Prowadzili działania wywiad.
They conducted intelligence activities against Poland and prepared acts of sabotage on behalf of Russian intelligence. Those detained are foreigners from the eastern border. The prosecutor's officers charged them in espionage for Russia and participation in an organized criminal group. Seeing the weaknesses of the current services of Donald Tusk's coalition government, the Kremlin will certainly not give up further sabotage operations.
For several days now, the whole world has been spectating the unexpected tension between Beijing and Tokyo. The Japanese Prime Minister has spoken about potential military aid to Taiwan. The Chinese Coast Guard has sailed through areas administered by Japan, and military drones have crossed the borders of islands controlled by Tokyo. The latest episode of the crisis erupted on November 7th, when Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi informed Parliament that a hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo. This statement provoked an allergic reaction from Beijing. The Japanese ambassador was summoned to the Chinese Foreign Ministry on an urgent basis. Anyone who dares to interfere in any way with the process of China's reunification will certainly face a severe response. To recap, China considers Taiwan to be its territory and does not rule out the use of force to take control of the island, which is only 110 kilometers from Japanese territory. The Taiwanese government rejects Beijing's claims. In a show of force, Chinese Coast Guard ships sailed near the Japanese-controlled Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Such actions by Chinese Coast Guard ships violate international law. We have lodged a strong protest through diplomatic channels and strongly urged them to leave Japanese territorial waters immediately. The dispute with China over Taiwan, which has been escalating for many years and has intensified in recent days, has prompted Beijing to call on its citizens to stay away from Japan. This information was reported by all national newspapers. According to Chinese authorities, Japan bears full responsibility for this crisis. Recently, provocative statements by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi on issues related to Taiwan have seriously undermined the political foundation of Sino-Japanese relations and worsened public sentiment between the two countries. The government in Tokyo sent a special envoy to Beijing today to defuse the conflict. Diplomat Masai Kanai will explain that Prime Minister Takaichi's comments do not signal a change in Japanese security policy. Taiwan, the main protagonist in the turmoil, has joined the dispute. These inappropriate actions by Chinese diplomats will only damage their own country's image. I advise China to observe the principle of mutual respect and strive to maintain good relations with other countries, including Taiwan, within the international community. Growing tensions around the world are posing serious challenges to the West in terms of digital security. Submarine cables, through which almost all global data traffic flows, are becoming increasingly important, and the security liability they pose to Western countries is becoming real. Irish businessman Declan Ganley, founder of Rivada Space Networks, is working on an alternative satellite network that could secure communications in the event of a failure or attack.
Up to the satellite, and the satellite then looks to offload that traffic onto the closest ground gateway. So it's looking back to Earth to find the closest ground gateway to the satellite, and then it sends your traffic onto the internet.
Currently, all global networks are, in practice, a combination of many smaller systems. The Outernet will be the first global, secure, and fully independent network. If President Trump wants to send a message to Beijing, he should jump on board this project, which would give Japan and allies permanent connectivity, no matter what China does to isolate its next victim. Taiwan lies just over 110 kilometers from Japan's westernmost islands, and close to key sea lanes used by Tokyo for oil and gas supplies. Japan is also home to the largest concentration of U.S. military forces outside the United States. Therefore, a dangerous situation in this location could be the spark for a global conflict.